In high school, my group told me to either do our big science project alone or we'd all get a 0. Knowing my teacher's policy would drop the lowest grade, I chose 0 and let them face the consequences. I still passed with an A, while they all failed and ended up in summer school. By the time I noticed the same script unfolding again and again, I stopped chalking it up to coincidence. At first, I told myself, maybe you're just unlucky. Maybe it's just 1 or 2 guys who happen to be tone deaf. But after the 3rd, 4th, 5th time, when the pattern practically wrote itself like deja vu, I couldn't deny it anymore. There was something going on here, and it wasn't just bad luck. The sequence was too familiar. Friendliness at the start, colonization jokes in the middle, backhanded compliments at the end, and then the inevitable, "So, do you want to grab a drink sometime?" It was like watching the same badly written play with different actors each time. And the strangest part was how little self-awareness there seemed to be. These men really believed they were being charming, funny, even generous by choosing me despite their admitted preferences for local women. What they didn't realize, or maybe didn't care about, was the impact it had on me. Each interaction chipped away at something. It wasn't just annoyance. It was the feeling of being othered, of being measured against stereotypes, and then told to be grateful for the scraps of approval. And the colonization jokes. Those cut the deepest. Maybe they thought they were being edgy or ironic or witty, but to me, they were reminders of pain that isn't abstract, pain that still echoes in my family's stories, in my country's collective memory. Reducing that to a punchline isn't just insensitive, it's arrogant. It tells me that they see India not as a nation with dignity and resilience, but as a backdrop for their humor. So I push back. Every time. I don't let those jokes slide. I remind them why colonization isn't funny, why it's not a topic you can just smirk through at a party. Sometimes it shuts them up, sometimes it makes them defensive, but either way, it always leaves the same awkward silence between us. And then, bafflingly, they'll turn around and ask me out like none of it happened. Do they think I'll forget the smirk when they called British exploitation progress? Do they think I'll overlook the condescension in exchange for their so-called compliments? Do they think that by labeling me different from other Indian women, they're doing me a favor? It makes me wonder if they even realize how transparent it all is. The superiority complex isn't hidden. It's written in the way they compare, the way they joke, the way they frame their attraction as an exception rather than genuine interest. And I can't help but feel like Indian men are silently being insulted in these conversations too. Sidelined, dismissed, made invisible in the same breath that I'm being exoticized. I walk away from these interactions with my head buzzing. Not because I want their attention, not because I feel rejected, but because the whole experience is so laced with arrogance that it leaves me unsettled. It's not about dating. It's about respect. It's about dignity. It's about how easily history, culture, and identity can be turned into playground banter. And honestly, it leaves me curious. Am I alone in this? Have other women, especially Indian women or women of color in the UK, experienced this weird mix of friendliness, colonization humor, and backhanded compliments? Or is this some strange quirk of the few British men I've met where I live? Because it's happened too many times for me to ignore, and I'd love to know if anyone else has seen the same pattern. Is it cultural arrogance? Is it a generational thing? Or is it just bad luck? All I know is I'm tired of having to brace myself for the same script every time. Tired of laughing off jokes that aren't funny. Tired of being told I'm different like it's the magic key that should make me grateful for attention. I don't hate British men. I don't think every one of them is like this. But I can't deny the pattern I've seen. And I'd be lying if I said it didn't change the way I approach these conversations now. So here I am, venting into the void, asking the internet the question I can't shake. Have you ever experienced men, especially British men, behaving this way? And if you're in the UK, is this really as common as it feels to me? Because if it is, I need to know I'm not the only one seeing it. The more I thought about these encounters, the more a disturbing pattern emerged. It wasn't just about me, or about whether they found me attractive, or even about the colonization jokes. There was something deeper, more insidious, woven into the way these British men carried themselves in conversation with me, something I could feel even when it wasn't said outright. It was the way they spoke about India, and by extension about Indian men. They never openly said, "I dislike Indian men," of course. That would be too obvious, too easy to call out. But the implication lingered in everything, in their smirks when making colonization remarks, in the way they framed their attraction to me as an exception, in the tone of superiority that seeped into their humor. It was like there was this unspoken hierarchy in their minds. British men at the top, local men as their rivals, and me somewhere in between. Someone who could be flattered, pursued, maybe even won over if they played their cards right. And I hated that I could feel it, even when they thought they were being subtle. There's something exhausting about being seen not as a person first, but as a representative of your country, your culture, your gender. With these men, it never felt like they were just talking to me. It was like I was carrying all of India on my shoulders in every interaction. My words, my reactions, even my laughter, seemed to be filtered through their lens of stereotypes and superiority. Take the colonization jokes, for example. They weren't just harmless quips. They were ways of asserting dominance, ways of saying, "We shaped your country. You wouldn't be who you are without us." And when they pivoted to asking me out, it felt less like genuine interest and more like an extension of that same attitude. See, we still have power here. Even you can't resist us. Maybe I'm overanalyzing. Maybe I've just been unlucky with the handful of British men I've met here. But when the same pattern repeats itself 2, 3, 4 times, it's hard not to notice the through line. And what makes it worse is the way they framed their attraction to me. It was never just, I like you. It was always couched in comparison, always framed against some invisible group of other Indian women they didn't like, or local women they supposedly preferred. The compliments weren't really compliments. They were insults dressed up as flattery. I don't usually date Indian women, but you're different. Even though I came here for locals, I find you prettier. I don't hate Indian women. Look, I'm asking you out. Each of those lines carries the same message. You're not really my first choice, but congratulations. You're the exception. It leaves a bitter taste every time. Because why should I feel honored to be someone's exception? Why should I accept a compliment that comes at the expense of women who look like me, who share my background, who are part of my community, and beneath all of it lies the quiet insult toward Indian men? They don't say it, but it's obvious. The subtle jabs, the colonizer smirks, the way they carry themselves when talking about India, it all points to the same underlying thought. We're better than the men from your country. Do they think we don't notice? Do they think we can't feel that energy, that condescension? I walk away from these encounters with this strange mix of emotions. On the surface, I laugh it off, tell myself it's just another awkward night, another weird conversation. But deep down, it lingers. The superiority complex, the backhanded compliments, the colonization jokes, they add up. And after a while, it's not just annoying, it's dehumanizing. It makes me hyper-aware of who I am in these spaces. Not just an Indian woman, but an Indian woman constantly being measured, judged, compared, and condescended to by men who carry the weight of their own history without even realizing it. And the worst part? After all this, after the weird comments and the superiority, they still expect me to be flattered when they ask me out. As if their interest alone is supposed to erase everything that came before it. But it doesn't. Instead, it leaves me with this lingering aftertaste of resentment, not just toward them, but toward the pattern itself, toward the way my identity gets twisted into something they can joke about, exoticize, and belittle all in the span of one conversation. It's exhausting. And honestly, it makes me wonder if anyone else has experienced the same thing, because sometimes I feel like I'm the only one seeing the pattern. But deep down, I know I can't be. Here's the part that honestly makes me laugh. Not because it's funny, but because it's so confusing, so absurd, that I don't know how else to process it. After making colonization jokes, after belittling India in casual conversation, these same British men almost always pivot into asking me out. The first time it happened, I thought I misheard. I was still reeling from a conversation where the guy had said something like, "You know, India wouldn't have modern infrastructure if it weren't for Britain." I pushed back, told him that exploiting a nation and leaving railways behind doesn't count as charity. The air got tense, he looked defensive, and I assumed that was the end of it. Awkward exit, case closed. But then he looked at me, smiled, and said, "By the way, would you like to grab coffee sometime?" I stared at him, blinking. Was this some kind of social experiment? Did he think putting down my country was the perfect foreplay for asking me out? It didn't stop there. Time and again, the same pattern unfolded. Friendly start, colonization jokes, defensive reaction when I pushed back, and then, as if nothing happened, an invitation. The worst part isn't just the timing, it's the compliments they use. Instead of just saying, "I think you're pretty," or "I'd like to get to know you," it always comes with some strange qualifier that makes it feel more insulting than flattering. Things like, "Even though I came here to date locals, I actually find you prettier. I don't usually date Indian women, but you're different. I don't hate Indian women. You know, I actually like you." Excuse me? I didn't ask for that disclosure. Who told you I wanted to know your dating preferences like there's some kind of confession? Imagine someone saying, "I don't usually eat this cuisine, but since it's here, I guess I'll try it." That's how it feels. Like I'm some backup option, a loophole in their personal preferences they think I should be honored to fill. And the strangest part is how normalized it seems for them. They say it with a straight face, as if they're delivering the sweetest compliment in the world. Meanwhile, I'm standing there, caught between irritation and disbelief, wondering if I should laugh in their face or just walk away. It always makes me question their intentions. Because if you really did think I was attractive, if you genuinely respected me, wouldn't you try to build a connection without insulting my culture first? Wouldn't you avoid comments that make me feel small before asking me to step closer? The contradiction is so glaring it almost feels deliberate. Like they want to see if I'll accept the push before the pull. Every time it happens, I feel the same mix of emotions. Confusion, because the shift is so sudden and doesn't make sense. Annoyance, because I shouldn't have to explain why backhanded compliments aren't compliments. Discomfort, because it makes me wonder what they really think of me, of Indian women in general. What's worse is that I can feel the underlying attitude even when they don't say it outright. They may never admit, "I don't value Indian men," But the way they talk, the way they compare, the way they single me out as different, it says enough. It's not admiration, it's condescension dressed up as attraction. So while they stand there, smiling, waiting for me to be flattered, I'm left speechless. Because how do you respond to someone who just indirectly told you, I didn't plan on liking your kind, but congratulations, you're the exception? The whiplash of it all leaves me reeling. 1 second, I'm defending my country's history against their tired jokes. And the next, I'm supposed to blush at being told I'm not like other Indian women. It's not just awkward. It's exhausting, and yet it keeps happening. Enough times that I can no longer chalk it up to coincidence. Enough times that I'm left wondering if this is some weird script certain men carry around in their heads. Degrade first, then dangle affection. If there's one pattern that has really stuck with me in these interactions, it's the colonization jokes. I almost want to put quotation marks around the word jokes because half the time, I can't even tell if they're meant to be funny or if they're a thinly disguised way of saying something they actually believe. It always starts harmless enough. Picture this. We're at a party, a group of people laughing, swapping stories about adjusting to life abroad. Someone mentions how hard it is to get certain groceries here, another jokes about missing their hometown street food, and the atmosphere is light. That's when the British guy in the group leans back, smirks, and says something like, well, at least we gave you railways. You should thank us for that. Cue awkward laughter. Sometimes people ignore it, sometimes they chuckle nervously, and sometimes I'm the only one who reacts. Because how do you let that slide? It's not just about railways, it's the implication behind it, the reduction of centuries of trauma, exploitation, and suffering into a casual punchline. It's the arrogance of pretending colonization was some kind of gift. Other times, it's even more blunt. I've heard, India wouldn't be where it is today without us. We civilized you, didn't we? Well, we left you with English, so you're welcome. Those words hit like little darts. And maybe to them it's just banter, but to me it's personal. Because behind every one of those jokes is history that left scars we're still healing from. My grandparents lived through independence. My family still talks about what it meant to shake off that shadow. For me, India's story isn't just something in a textbook. It's something woven into the way I grew up. The stories I heard at home, the pride I carry in who we are today. So when a British man I barely know casually throws out a colonization joke, it feels like someone walking into my house, putting their feet on the table and mocking the walls. It's not clever, it's not witty, it's dismissive, and it happens not just in groups but one-on-one too. There was this one conversation where it started off normal enough. We were talking about politics, sharing light banter. Then out of nowhere, he says, you know, India actually benefited from the British. Without us, you'd still be backwards. I remember blinking, stunned. For a moment, I couldn't even think of what to say. And then, my instinct kicked in. I reminded him that there's a reason India doesn't look at Britain fondly. That whatever infrastructure was built, it wasn't a gift. It was designed for extraction, for empire, for control. I said, we didn't ask to be colonized. You don't get credit for the scraps you left behind after bleeding a country dry. He went quiet for a second, then laughed awkwardly, and tried to shift the topic. Sometimes that's how it goes. They retreat, uncomfortable, and the conversation limps forward. Other times they get defensive. They'll say, oh, come on, it's just history, or you're too sensitive, it's just a joke. That line, just a joke, makes me want to scream. Because to them, it might be just a throwaway line. To me, it's a reminder of how easily our struggles are minimized. How casually centuries of pain can be brushed off with a smirk. What makes it worse is that I know if I don't respond, I'll regret it later. I'll replay the conversation in my head 100 times, thinking of all the things I should have said. So I always say something, even if it makes the atmosphere heavy, even if it makes them defensive. I refuse to just smile and let it slide. Do I hate banter? No. Do I hate jokes about politics? Not at all. I make them too. But there's a difference between clever satire and punching down. And these colonization jokes are never as lighthearted as they pretend to be. They always carry that subtle edge, that reminder that in their mind, Britain is still somehow above India. And then, the strangest part, after all that awkwardness, after the defensive back and forth, they'll turn around and ask me out. It's as if the conversation is some kind of ritual. Friendliness, colonization joke, awkward tension, invitation. And it baffles me every single time. One thing about living abroad is that social events become your lifeline. You're far from home, your family isn't around, and you need a sense of community, so you go to parties, meetups, language exchanges, and whatever random gatherings pop up on Facebook or WhatsApp groups. And I love them in theory. I love the idea of meeting people from different backgrounds, swapping stories, sharing food, laughing over the differences in our cultures. But over time, those same spaces also became where I noticed the divide the most. Here's how it usually played out. A group would gather, some locals, some expats, maybe a mix of students and professionals. Drinks in hand, music in the background, and conversations branching off in every corner. I'd see how quickly foreign men, especially the newer arrivals, gravitated toward local women. Their voices softened, their postures shifted, their smiles widened. You could practically feel the eagerness radiating off them. They weren't just socializing. They were auditioning. And again, fair enough. People are allowed to be attracted to who they're attracted to. What I couldn't ignore, though, was the contrast. With me, their tone was different. Less careful, less thoughtful. Sometimes it felt like they saw me as safe to joke with, or someone they didn't need to impress. I'd make a comment in a group and they'd laugh politely, but when a local woman spoke, they leaned in, genuinely engaged. At first, I shrugged it off. Maybe I was imagining it. Maybe I was just sensitive because I was already self-conscious about being in a foreign country. But then came the repeat pattern, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. British men, in particular, stood out to me. And again, let me stress, I don't mean all British men. I don't want to generalize an entire country based on a handful of encounters. But it happened enough times with men from Britain that I started to notice a script forming. It always started the same way. They were nice. Very nice, even. Smiles, small talk, asking where I was from. We'd talk about studies, work, how we liked living in this country. On the surface, they were friendly and approachable. I remember thinking a few times, wow, maybe I was wrong. Maybe they're not like the others, but the shift always came. At some point, the conversation would take a turn toward humor. Someone would crack a joke. Maybe about food. Maybe about politics. Maybe just something silly about adjusting to life abroad. And that's when it happened. Suddenly, the jokes would veer into colonization territory. Out of nowhere. It was as if they had this reflex, a colonizer joke button they just couldn't resist pressing. Sometimes it was subtle. Like, oh, well, Britain gave the world railways. Other times, it was blunt. India wouldn't be what it is today without us. The first time, I blinked in shock, half convinced I'd misheard. The second time, I realized it wasn't a fluke. By the third time, I could predict the punchline before they even said it. I joke about politics, too. I enjoy sharp humor. But what unsettled me was how quickly those jokes escalated. What started as banter turned into putting India down, belittling its history, and making sweeping comments that made my skin crawl. It wasn't clever. It wasn't funny. It was uncomfortable, and it carried a weight that humor can't disguise. And here's the kicker. After making those remarks, after putting me in that awkward spot where I had to either defend my country or sit in silence, they'd suddenly flip the script. They'd ask me out. I can't even explain the whiplash of that. One second, I'm standing there listening to jokes about colonization. And the next, I'm hearing lines like, even though I came here for locals, you're actually really pretty. Or, I don't usually date Indian women, but you're different. As if that's supposed to be a compliment. That's when it clicked for me. The friendliness at the start wasn't really about me. It was about curiosity, maybe even about novelty. And when the jokes came out, it wasn't just humor. It was a way of asserting some weird sense of superiority. And then, the sudden pivot to asking me out was like trying to frame it as, see, I don't hate Indian women after all. I picked you. I can't lie, it made my stomach turn. When I first moved abroad, I knew things would feel different. I wasn't naive enough to believe life in a new country would just slot perfectly into place. Culture is layered, social dynamics take time to learn, and people always come with their own baggage. But nothing prepared me for how visible the differences would be in something as simple as going to a party or a casual social meetup. The city I live in is a kind of melting pot. People come from all over the world for different reasons. Jobs, studies, family, adventure. Some stay for a few months, others plant roots. And a good chunk of them, especially men from certain countries, come here with a specific image in their head. The dream of dating local women. I didn't want to believe that at first. I wanted to assume good intentions, that people came here to build real connections, maybe explore culture, maybe even integrate. But over time, the pattern became too clear to ignore. It's in the way conversations play out in groups. We'd be at a friend's apartment, maybe a mix of locals and foreigners, maybe a casual Friday night with drinks and music. I'd notice how the local women were treated. The softness in tone. The extra patience in listening, the laughter that came a little too easily at their jokes. It wasn't rude or cruel toward me exactly. No one openly excluded me, but the difference was glaring. When you're on the outside of that kind of attention, it stings in this quiet way, like you've been placed in a different category without anyone saying it out loud. I kept telling myself, okay, this is their choice. They can be attracted to whoever they want. It's not my business as long as they're not outright disrespectful. And I meant that. I don't believe anyone should be obligated to find me attractive or give me special attention just because I'm in the room. But over time, a strange realization set in. While attraction is one thing, attitude is another. And it wasn't just about who they liked, it was about how they carried themselves when talking to women like me. The first few times I brushed it off. Maybe they were just shy. Maybe I wasn't their type. Maybe I was overthinking. But patterns have a way of announcing themselves louder and louder until you can't deny them anymore. It started with small encounters, at bars, networking events, or even cultural meetups. When conversation stayed surface level, everything was fine. Casual introductions, questions about where I was from, what I studied, what I was doing in this country. Standard small talk. But whenever the conversation shifted even slightly into humor or deeper topics, a strange shift occurred. With many foreigners, not just British men at first, I could sense that their friendliness had conditions. If they were speaking to a local woman, the respect felt more natural, less performative. With me, though, it was as if they were testing boundaries, as if I was someone they could tease harder, push more, maybe even talk down to under the guise of jokes. The worst part was how consistent it felt. Not every man, of course. I don't want to paint with such a broad brush. But enough that I began to notice it as a trend rather than coincidence. And then there were the British men. I only met a handful of them. And again, I want to stress this. I'm not generalizing all British men everywhere. I don't live in the UK, I don't have enough exposure for that. But the ones I met where I live shared this weird, oddly specific pattern that I couldn't ignore. It was like clockwork. They'd start out friendly, even charming. They'd make small talk, smile, ask questions. They seemed approachable at first, even easy to get along with. I'd think, okay, this seems like a normal, harmless interaction. But little did I know things were about to follow the same script, and not in a good way.